Hello! I'm actually filming this intro for the second time, and I don't think it works quite so well the second time, but I accidentally deleted the footage for the first intro that I filmed. So I am having to film it again. This video, as you can tell from the title, is a reading challenge where I picked the books purely based on the covers. And this video was very much so inspired by G from the channel Book Roast, so I will link her video down in the description bar below, where she did exactly this. She went to a bookshop and she picked some books based purely on the covers, not knowing anything about them, and I watched it and immediately the next day wanted to do the same thing. So I did just that. I went straight to Waterstones after work and I intended to pick 3 books, but then there was a buy one get one half price deal, so I ended up getting 4 books that I knew nothing about, had never heard of, had never seen before, didn't know what they were about, but the covers made me want to read them, and I tried to pick some different things. So I went to the adult fantasy section and I picked 1 book from there. I didn't go to the YA section because I'm having a bit of difficulty with YA at the moment, and I didn't want to kind of immediately set a book up to fail, and I know that already I'm struggling with enjoying YA right now, so I didn't go there. I then went to the fiction section, which is a little bit dangerous for me because I don't really read general fiction, and general fiction encompasses a whole lot of things, some of which I really don't like. So that one was risky, but I wanted to give it a go. And then I also went to the middle grade section, particularly I went to the 9 to 12 age range, and that's where I ended up getting 2 books because they were on 2 for or buy one get one half price. So I actually, when I'm filming this now, do actually know what these books are about, because I filmed that first intro that I've ended up deleting where I discovered what the books were about, but I filmed that quite a while ago and I haven't looked at these books again since. So I mean, I still have a vague recollection of what they're about now, but I promise you that I did not know what they were about when I bought them. The only thing that I checked about them before I actually bought them in the shop was that they weren't a sequel and that there was an audiobook in existence for these particular books. So I'll go in the order that I just mentioned the genre age ranges in, and the first book that I picked up was D by Michelle Faber, and as you can see it is incredibly pretty and foiled, and that's definitely what got me. You will see a theme developing here. I was a little bit nervous about the cover because I just sort of thought, oh god, I can't really tell what kind of fantasy this is, but it was just so pretty. And there was one other book that I was considering picking up, but it did end up being a sequel and they didn't have the first book in stock, so it was this one, and I will read you the synopsis. It all starts on the morning the letter D disappears from the language. It vanishes from conversation at the breakfast table, then from the road signs outside. Soon the local dentist and the neighbour's Dalmatian are missing, and even the donkey derby has been called off. The only one who notices is 13-year-old DeKillo. Out of the blue, DeKillo is called to the home of her ancient history teacher, Professor Dodderfield, and his faithful Labrador, Nellie Robinson. And this is where our story really begins. Set between England and the wintry land of Liminus, a world enslaved by the monstrous Gamp and filled with fearsome enchanting creatures, here is a mesmerising tale of friendship and bravery for our times. And the sort of the blurbs? Anyway, a contemporary Dickensian fable about moral courage and self-determination, says the Sunday Times. A story that will be found and enjoyed and dreamed about for years to come. Glorious, says Neil Gaiman. And if ever a book like this was needed, it is now, by Diane Setterfield. So it sounds really, really good, actually, and I'm really glad that this ended up being the one that I picked up. I'm very much looking forward to reading this one, and it does sound a little bit reminiscent of Strange the Dreamer in the whole aspect of, you know, in this, the letter D has disappeared, been forgotten, and in Strange the Dreamer it's weep has been forgotten and has disappeared, but I don't know, I like the sound of this and I'm looking forward to reading it, and yes, it is very, very pretty. The next one that I picked up is one that I was particularly nervous about. This is what the cover looks like. Absolutely beautiful. I just couldn't resist picking it up. It helps that it's quite short as well, and this was the one from the fiction section. The reason I'm particularly nervous, or was particularly nervous picking this one up, is because if you look at the items on the cover, it does seem to suggest that it's more along the historical fiction line of things, and that's really not my genre at all. I tend to completely avoid historical fiction, and especially historical fiction about either of the world wars. That in particular I have absolutely no interest in reading, and so I was a little bit worried about this one, but because it's so beautiful and because it's short and it was the most beautiful fiction book that I found, I decided to give it a go. It's called The Mad Women's Ball by Victoria Mass. And actually, funnily enough, the bookseller who was working at the checkout where I bought these books, or paid for the books, I suppose, said that she had recently read this and it was totally a cover buy for her as well. So there you go. This one, I will read you the synopsis, and it has some French words in it, so apologies in advance, particularly Joanna and Abby, for my terrible pronunciation. The Salpêtrière Asylum, 1885. All of Paris is in thrall to Dr. Charcot and his displays of hypnotism on women who have been deemed mad or hysterical, but the truth is more complicated. These women are often inconvenient, unwanted wives or strong-willed daughters. Once a year, a grand event is held, the Mad Women's Ball. For the Parisian elite, it is the highlight of the social season. For the women themselves, it is a rare moment of hope. Geneviève is a senior nurse who has placed her faith in Dr. Charcot and his new science. But everything changes when she meets Eugenie, the daughter of a bourgeois family, for Eugenie has a secret and she needs Genevieve's help. Their fates will collide on the night of the Mad Women's Ball. And honestly, the first time I read that synopsis, when I filmed this intro the first time, I was so excited by that synopsis because it is more along the lines of kind of period drama, which, I mean, it's 1885, so it's not quite period drama, but it's more towards that sort of side of things, and especially with the ball aspect, and especially from the cover, it seems like it's going to be more like glitz glamour type vibes, which I'm more into than the slightly more modern historical fiction. And also, it seems like it's going to have lots of really interesting commentary on mental health, which is something that I find super interesting. So I'm really looking forward to this one, and actually it's probably where I'm going to start. And then we have the two middle grade books. So the first one that I originally picked up was the Book of Stolen Dreams by David Farr. Once again, we have foiling. Is that why I picked it up? Partially, but also the title really drew me in. And the tagline is "Let the Hunt Begin," which sounds like a little bit of a competition-y type vibe. So definitely just the whole theme and the cover is what drew me to pick this particular one up. And I'll read you the synopsis now. One book with the power to change the world. Plunged into danger when they help their father steal a forbidden book, Rachel and Robert are forced to go on the run. To save their father from prison, they must discover the truth about the Book of Stolen Dreams. But the cruel and powerful President Mulstein knows its secrets and will stop at nothing to snatch the book's magic for himself. The hunt is on. Rachel and Robert face a desperate battle to stop the book falling into Mulstein's hands, for if it does, he could destroy everything. Step inside the pages of an unforgettable adventure. So it sounds really fun. I I'm quite specific about the types of middle grade books that I like to read. I like them to be fantasy, and I like them to be adventure based stories, potentially with some sort of mystery element to them, and it sounds like this book is going to tick all of those particular boxes, so that's pretty lucky, and I'm looking forward to reading it. And then the final book does not have any foiling on it, but what it does have is a giant cat, and it's called Maggie Blue and the Dark World by Anna Goodall. And honestly, when I picked this one up, I picked it up because of the cat, and because I was hoping that it would mean that there would be a talking cat in the book, because I do love that. And I think from memory I was right, but I'll read you the synopsis now and we can double check. A Sunday Times Children's Book of the Week, and I think it also won the Costa Coffee Book Awards or something like that. It had a sticker on it, but I took that off. Maggie Blue has always been happy to stay under the radar. The only people who notice her are her eccentric Aunt Esme and the beautiful Ida, a fellow pupil who takes great pleasure in being mean to Maggie. Only Miss Kane, the new counsellor at school, shows her any kindness. Then Ida disappears, and no one seems to know what might have happened to her. No one except Maggie. With Hoagie, the irascible talking cat, by her side, Maggie finds herself entering a world very different to her own, a world where happiness is a commodity, a world that Maggie is connected to in a way she never believed was possible, which just really gives me the Cat Returns vibes, which is a Studio Ghibli film, which is very strange, but I do like it quite a lot. And of course, it's a little bit on the longer side. In fact, both of these middle grades are, but that's because the pages are thicker, the font is bigger, the spacing is wider. So this one is 327 pages, but you can see from the formatting that it's going to be a much quicker read than if, you know, an adult book of the same length. The Book of Stolen Dreams is 390 pages exactly, but again, wide margins, blah blah blah. So those were the 4 books that I promise you that I picked without knowing what the synopses were about, and now we all know what the synopses of these books are. Like I mentioned, I think I'm actually going to start with the Mad Women's Ball. I've only been able to find the audiobook for Maggie Blue through Scribd or my library. It's through Scribd. None of the others have audiobooks available either on Scribd or at any of the libraries that I have a card for, and I have a card for 4 different library groups. None of them have audiobooks for any of these, so I'm gonna have to buy them all from Audible, which is a bit of a shame, but c'est la vie. I am going to start with this one, as I mentioned, and I mean, I don't know how much I'm realistically going to update you here because it's so short. It's 211 pages. I think that the audiobook is about 7.25 hours, and I will listen at least 2 times speed, if not 2.5, depending on the speed of the narrator. So I don't know if there's going to be much time for me to update you while I'm reading this particular book, but if there is, I will update you, and if not, I will speak to you again once I have finished the book, and I will let you know what I thought of it. And I'm looking forward to getting into this particular reading challenge. Let's see whether my taste in covers matches my taste in the content of books, shall we? So I have read the majority of the Mad Women's Ball. I read most of it in one sitting this afternoon, and I'm just about to finish the last 30 or so pages, so I thought I'd just pop in to let you know that it is a super quick read. It's quite easy to sit down and read sort of all in one go, so I'm just going to go ahead and finish it now, and then I'll be back with my thoughts very soon. Okay, so I have finished reading The Mad Women's Ball by Victoria Muss, and first things first, this is actually a work of translation. So it was originally written in the French and translated by Frank Wynne or Wine, I'm not sure of the pronunciation. So if you are French and you like to read in French, you can read this in its original language if you would like to do so. It is also indeed a historical fiction novel, as I had kind of anticipated, and so some of it is very much so based in fact. So the asylum that is referenced within the text, the Salpêtrière, was actually an asylum. First it was a prison, and then it was an asylum for women with mental health concerns. But while there were some women within the asylum who actually did have various mental health conditions and disorders and so on and so forth. Hang on, I just want to fix this lighting. There we go, that's a bit better. The reality is that a lot of these women actually were not mentally unwell. They were just, as the synopsis notes, women who were unmarried or were willful or were doing things that society at that time deemed inappropriate in some particular way. I will say that this book does have some paranormal elements that I was not expecting, and whilst usually I would enjoy that, I actually feel like it slightly took away from the point that the book was trying to make. So really, it's a book, it's told in third person, but it follows a few different characters. I will say that there are various trigger warnings in this book, and in particular sexual violence, which is partially depicted on page, so be careful of that. So there is a character that is part of her story, so it deals with that, and there's also a character who is not mentally unwell but ends up in the asylum anyway, and then there's a character who works at the asylum, and she fully believes that all of these women who are in the asylum are mentally unwell and they are meant to be there. And throughout the course of the story she starts to realise that maybe that's not quite the case, and maybe things are not quite as straightforward as she had thought. So I won't say more about what the story is about than that, because it is quite short. I do kind of wish that the paranormal elements weren't in there, because like I said, I feel like it takes away a little bit from the point of the story, which is shining that spotlight on the way that women were treated in this time, and the fact that, you know, if you were a woman who had the absolute audacity to have an opinion or to want to do something that was not in line with what the men in society wanted you to do or thought you ought to do, then you could very easily be deemed as insane and carted off to an asylum and stuck there for the rest of your life with no hope of ever being discharged, because you only get discharged from an insane asylum if you are no longer deemed insane, and these women were never insane to begin with. So I think that whole discussion is really, really interesting. I read The Yellow Wallpaper, I think it was last year now, maybe it was this year, I can't remember. Either way, that deals with similar themes and I found that particularly interesting also. So yeah, I liked the discussions. I didn't like what the author decided to do with the plot. The paranormal elements were put in there to help drive the plot forwards, and I can see why she did what she did, but unfortunately that for me took away a little bit from the discussion. But I am still glad that I read this one. It's definitely not something that I would have picked up in any other context or would even probably have heard about, because I just don't pay attention to anything that has to do with historical fiction. And actually I pretty well enjoyed this one. It's not going to be a new favourite or anything, but I did enjoy the process of reading it, and I did read it nearly in one sitting. I just had sort of 30 pages left that I didn't manage to read in the one sitting because I was hungry and I went and had dinner. But having read that one, I think that I'm going to read Maggie Blue next, which is one of the middle grades. Since there's 2 middle grades, I figure I'll do 1 adult, 1 middle grade, 1 adult, 1 middle grade, just to break things up a little bit. And so I will probably, I don't know if I'll start this one tonight, I may not, but I will keep you posted. So I finished reading Maggie Blue and the Dark World last night. I didn't update you then because I did a yoga class straight after and then I was tired. So didn't read this in one go. I actually read it in 2 sittings, and I think that that is a little bit telling in some ways. I liked it, but I didn't love it. It's kind of an urban fantasy type vibe with portal fantasy elements, and it's one of those middle grade books that's a little bit on the creepy side of things. So with the world and the portal fantasy element, it feels a little bit like Narnia, but then in terms of the creepy side of things, it feels a little bit like those kind of classic children's stories like Grimm's fairy tales. You've got that slight edge. So if that's the kind of thing that you like and that you're looking for, then I definitely recommend this one, and I think it's actually pretty good for this season. I thought this was going to be a standalone, but actually it is the first book in a series, a trilogy. I don't know how many books there will be, but this is the first one. The next one's not out until next year, 2023. And I did enjoy it, but as I say, I didn't love it. It's about Maggie Blue, who has a mum who is in hospital because she is struggling with depression, and Maggie doesn't really understand that, and she's living with her aunt and going to a school where she doesn't really have any friends, and she is bullied by this girl Ida, but she feels that she and Ida should be friends, and then Ida goes missing and Maggie feels like it's her responsibility to save her. And there's a portal fantasy world. I'll not get into how that comes into the story, but it is an interesting part of the story. I tell you what it reminds me of in terms of the creepy side of things, a little bit. It reminds me of The Wind in the Willows and Toad Hall. That's the kind of vibe I get from this. So yeah, it's good. I liked the talking cat. He's kind of a typical grumpus type cat, which I really enjoyed, but this wasn't my favourite read ever and not really my style of middle grade. I tend to prefer something more firmly in fantasy and a little bit more magical and adventure filled than this one was. It also really reminded me of Beatrix Potter and the way that some of her books were a little bit creepy, like I don't know the name of the actual book, but it's the one where the cats or kittens actually get rolled up in pastry and are going to get baked into pies. Like, that whole creepy vibe is what I get from this. So yeah, not my fave, but I did enjoy reading it. And the next thing I'm going to read is D. It's just in the other room because I am just about to head out. I'm going to go to a tea shop for some tea and scones, and I'm going to take you with me, but on my mobile phone, so the footage might look a little bit different, but I thought I'd just quickly show you an OOTD so you can see my camera now. Sorry about that. So I have this shirt on. This is from Monkey, my jacket from Lucy and Yak, and just some culottes which I got from ASOS ages ago, and I'm going to wear my Dr. Martens black boots. So I'm going to head out now. I'm going to go and read in that little tea shop, and I'll take some images for you and show you next. So as you saw, I went to the tea shop and I had a lovely pot of tea and scone, and I read my book and it was very nice, and I walked there and back. The walk was okay, it was fine, it's not the most scenic of routes, but it's okay. And this actually ended up being quite an apt read for that particular activity. So it reads very quickly, I will say that first of all. They're very, very short chapters. I think the longest chapter was maybe like 4 or 5 pages. I didn't actually count, but something along those lines. So it's all very short chapters with quite a sort of snappy writing style. So it's quite quick to read, and that worked quite nicely, I thought, for reading in that kind of setting. But also it's inspired by Dickens, right? I mean, that's quite clear from, you know, the blurbs and A Tale of Two Worlds, A Tale of Two Cities. So it's very much based on Dickens, but I haven't really read much Dickens. I've read A Christmas Carol and I've read Great Expectations. That one was back in school. Christmas Carol was more recent. I think I read it last Christmas. But I'm not really a fan of Dickens. I don't like his style of writing, and in general I'm not a massive fan of his storytelling anyway. A part of that is because I think he's particularly long-winded when he doesn't need to be, and that's just because in those times you were paid by the word, so it makes sense that it was a bit more wordy than it needed to be. But it just, I've never connected with Dickens' writing style, so I didn't really pick up on any parallels that existed between this and particularly A Tale of Two Cities, which I haven't read, but also just Dickens in general, so I can't really comment on any of that. But I did definitely pick up on some parallels between this and Alice in Wonderland especially, and also The Wizard of Oz. I haven't read The Wizard of Oz, but I have read Alice in Wonderland, and I've seen the film The Wizard of Oz, and I've seen a couple of different adaptations of Alice in Wonderland. So you know, it's this kind of strange world, strange storytelling, and that's definitely present here. The letter D disappears from the alphabet, and then following that things that are named something beginning with D, they start to disappear as well, and that is actually in the text. The D's stop appearing in the text, and so it's that kind of strange storytelling that is happening here, which is why I say it was kind of apt to be reading this in that particular setting in the tea shop, because it's a very similar kind of vibe really. But I did enjoy this. I didn't love it, but I definitely enjoyed it, and it was a very quick and easy read. It definitely, as I said, is reminiscent of Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland, and I think that the author actually mentions that. So he mentions that it's, you know, inspired by Dickens, but it does also mention Alice in Wonderland. It mentions Narnia as well, which of course this is very much inspired by. It's a portal fantasy, and in fact I think that the character does even go through a wardrobe to get to this portal fantasy world. And then while there, it's kind of a travelling story. So Diccolo has to travel to a certain location to try to rescue the letter D and then return again, and that it's sort of this almost episodic journey where, you know, that we travel to a specific destination and then a thing happens in this destination and we overcome that thing and then we move to the next destination, which is, I think, where The Wizard of Oz kind of comes into it. It also says that it's partially inspired by The Wonderful O, which is not a book that I've read, but it is a book in which the letter O disappears, so you can see where the correlation is there. So definitely not a new favourite, but again, I did quite enjoy this one. So I feel like this vlog is going pretty well in terms of, I picked these books completely based on their covers, knowing absolutely nothing about them. And so far I have actually read the entirety of these books and basically enjoyed them. I don't have any new favourites, but I would have been exceptionally surprised if I had found a new favourite this way. But I'm still quite surprised that I haven't had any DNFs yet, and I haven't had any books that I have really just not liked. So I think it's gone pretty well so far. I'm actually going away on holiday, so I'm going to have to kind of put this on pause now. I was thinking of ending the vlog here and putting this up before I went away on holiday, but actually I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause it. The last time I spoke to you was a little over a month ago now, at which point I was placing this vlog and reading challenge on hold while I went away on holiday, and then I never came back to it. So I had a really nice holiday and then I just got distracted by reading other things, and now I'm about in a couple of days to start my Goodreads reading challenge, so I'm just not going to come back to this vlog. I mean, you can tell that the time has passed by the fact that my hair has grown out. So I'm not going to be reading the Book of Stolen Dreams in this vlog. I will read that one day, but just not in this reading challenge. And I've already told you all of my thoughts about all of the books, so really this is just an outro clip. But I will say that I haven't really thought much about those books since finishing them, and I think that that kind of encapsulates kind of the way I felt about the books. I liked them, but I didn't love them. They were just fine. And I have felt a little bit like that for a lot of my reads, both this year and last year, in fact. So I feel like I need to find a way of kind of figuring out how to get back to reading books that I really am loving, and I think I've lost sight of that a little bit over the recent years, and I think I was getting a little bit better at it at the beginning of the year, and then it's kind of faded away again. So it's not really within the topic of this particular video, but that's where I'm at and what I've been feeling recently, I think. So yeah, that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks!